Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Vibe EDU show, podcast, what have you, wherever you're listening from. I'm here with Kim Gameroz, Joshua Stamper, and Mitch Weathers, and we are in episode 12, I'm told, and this is number 4 on our educational industrial complex, the systems series. We've done a series on professional learning. We did a series on teacher evaluations, which people dug really deep into those. And now we're finishing up this one on the education system and changing the system. I've been super excited about this. Obviously, my friends have been poking the bear and making me say things that sometimes I wish I didn't say. And I always don't remember what it is that comes out of my mouth as soon as it comes out. And so I'm going to kick it off by handing it over to Kim. And Kim, I really would like for you to reflect on some of the really cool responses that you've gotten from your community, because you sent us these Voxers over today. There must have been a half a dozen. Some of them were a minute. Some of them were 3.5 minutes of people reflecting on the show. I always get a kick out of that, but let's start there. And we also don't even know what we're going to talk about in the next series. So maybe that'll come out of this conversation. So here we go.
I love that. Well, I think one in particular that stuck with me was an educator who was talking about how can we really create change, but also make it long lasting. And she had said something about, we talk about non-negotiables, and my administrator, they've talked about what they expect to see, but then the administrator kind of doesn't ever show up and doesn't really know like what it's supposed to look like, and doesn't know how to support, and just falls away. And so I think it's important for us to talk about how we can really, in order to make this change, like what are the things that we can do so that it is long lasting?
I think the other things too that were brought up too were just how they related to one specific topic, which TJ, maybe this is what you're getting at too, because we've kind of teased this, but just the role of homework, or maybe the reasons as to why it shouldn't exist. And I know, Kim, there was one that a teacher was talking about, just a belief that she had. She was pounding the table for a very long time. And then it wasn't until she had her own children to see that example of how it's probably not the best practice. And then also some of the people that she was talking to also adopted that same mindset based on their own experiences with their own kids. And I know for me as a teacher, things changed drastically from pre-kids to post-kids, and kind of my viewpoint of like what that educational environment should look like. And then as they've gotten older, and as I just continue to add children in my house, I think we're now to 6, if I can count correctly, but each one of them going through their own span, right? I've got one in preschool all the way to college. So now I've got the full gamut of the educational system to see, okay, are these practices the best for them and best for our family? Because although we are in a dynamic of a husband and a wife, we both have jobs, right? But there's other dynamics that get in the way of that. Similar to if you've ever had on your campus like that activity of like, hey, if you've grown up in poverty, take a step back, and if you've had, and some of these are like the ACE test too, right? If you've been in a divorced home, take another step back. And then you keep doing this until you realize that some folks have been on an easier track as far as their educational advancement versus those who have come through really difficult times in their own household and how it affects them. It's similar to this, right? As far as it's not equal in each home. And so to have a practice like that, to say that everyone has the opportunity to sit down with their child and work with them on homework is obviously not fair.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that was really cool from the recordings was just the teacher reflection, to your point, Josh, on what I used to think that I don't think anymore. I really like that about the changes in my personal practice over time, and the rationalization of those changes, and why I made these, like the deep thought about the reasons why I did that before and the reasons why I don't do it anymore. I like that part. What Kim was mentioning was one of the teachers was like literally begging for accountability. Like I got a kick out of that as a former administrator. Like she's like literally, you said we were going to do these things, and then nobody's coming around to make sure that my peers are doing them. And that's not fair to me, because I thought we were all going to be on the same page. Now we're not. And we've talked about that before. And I think the last thing I'll say, and I'll kick it over to Mitch, is that in this regard, I'm calling more for a revolution. When I say systems change, I'm really calling for like a revolutionary change, like total structure shifts. So the teachers were reflecting on homework. And this is what you were getting at, Josh, is like they were reflecting on homework, but some of them had like new age homework strategies. And I liked them. I thought they were neat to listen to. And I always like to hear teachers reflect out loud. That Voxer group is really cool. I want to join the Voxer group. So I don't know how I can get on the Voxer group. But the revolution I'm talking about is still when we ask kids to go home and do things like play a game with an adult, or do things that aren't worksheet based, but are things that we think they can do with family members at home. There's lots of kids across this country and in every country that just can't do that. So how do we completely flip that structure of homework to either not do it anymore? So here's what I used to do and I don't do it at all anymore, or some other way that we can ensure that every kid has access to this and every kid is empowered to be able to do it. I hope that makes sense, but I like the reflection, but I want to revolutionize things, not just tweak them to do it differently than what was done to us.
Mm-hmm.
I think the homework specific, that conversation, well, I would say it's every aspect of teaching, which is why one area, or dimension of the practice that makes it so exhausting, but everything has to be, there's intentionality behind it. Like everything a teacher does. And if you've not taught, you just don't understand that. And maybe that's true of other professions as well. But like, do you stand by the door? Or do you not? How long do you stand by the door? What do you say when you're standing by the door? What had to be done before I stood by the door so that I can stand by the door? I mean, it's endless. And it is endless because you're constantly coming back to, reflecting on your practice and that intentionality. But homework in particular, I think it really needs intentionality, because it's so often in our industry, we do what was done to us without any thought, because it's like, what else do you do? That's just what we do. We give homework. And most of the time we give homework, one, because it was done to us, but two, it's often used as a formative assessment, a formative feedback piece. And we know, to the point that you're all making, that kids go home to very different environments, different lived experiences. So there's an inequity of using homework as a formative assessment. There's an inauthenticity to it if you're using it as a formative assessment. Who helped them? Who didn't? Do you have a tutor? Both of my kids have their own room and a desk. It's not a big room. It's not a big desk, but they can shut the door and they can come get help from us, right to the point of like where you're going, when you are at home. So I think the intentionality is part of that bigger conversation. Why, if you are giving homework, again, just this particular conversation around homework, why? And then is it, like you're saying, TJ, like the new age, the homework 2.0 or whatever, it's still got to be the why. And then the equity piece has got to be there. But when you really start to analyze homework, it's like, what? We could do away with it and be just fine.
Yeah.
There's enough learning that can happen in a school day that you don't have to do any homework, in my opinion, ever.
Well, I think the question becomes, if I want learning to take place, if I can't control the environment where that learning is taking place, then that probably shouldn't be a place where I think the real learning is going to happen.
Right.
So where can you control the environment? In the school, in the classroom, on the field trip, maybe the summer program, maybe the evening classes that people take, whatever the case may be, you can control that environment. You can't control what happens outside of it. Even with my doctoral students, I try hard. It's a lot of asynchronous work and a lot of virtual classes that I teach. But the hybrid stuff where we're face-to-face, I try hard to just make it all class-based. Now, there's stuff they have to do, but even the discussion boards and the stuff that we put in place, I'm not sure that's maximizing and thought-provoking the learning environment. And that's a little bit different, but I'm, trying to practice what I preach too.
Mm-hmm.
So my brain went to this thing like the very beginning of the school year. A lot of elementary teachers do, and it's all around equity and fairness. And what they do, and I wrote about this in my book, Becoming the Bison, because I feel like if you're an elementary teacher, you'd be like, oh yeah, I do that, right? It's just like a thing. And what they do is they talk like, who has bumped their head before? And they like raise their hands, right? And they give like a Band-Aid to the kid and they like put it on their head. And then they're like, well, who's hurt their knee before? And they're like, raise their hand, whatever. And they go over to the other kid and they put the Band-Aid on their head. Who's ever stubbed their toe before? They raise their hand again, go over to the kid, but they put the Band-Aid on their head. And no matter what it is, all these different things that have happened to them, right? Who's hurt their heart before? You've been heartbroken, like all those things, but the Band-Aid goes on their head. Well, because it's equitable, right? Everybody gets the Band-Aid, but is it fair? Like, no, like I didn't need a Band-Aid on my head. Like that wasn't it. The Band-Aid needed to be on my heart. Like, what am I going to do to support myself? I need that. And I think if we look at everything in that light, the equity and the fairness piece, I think TJ, like exactly what you guys are saying, it's equitable, but is it fair for all, right? If they're going home and they aren't supported, they don't have the desk, they don't have the parent support, they don't have the tutor, like, is it fair to have them all getting the same thing? So maybe that's a thing that can kind of shift. I mean, TJ, you were talking about like, we got to bring this down to the studs and rebuild this. So maybe it is a conversation around equity and fairness. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Fair is not always equal.
Right. It's what
good book, by
That's
the way.
back to what's the intention of the homework?
Right.
Like if it is, TJ, you kind of mentioned this, like if it is like deep learning or practice or whatever that the point of that activity or assignment or whatever is, then you have to look at it through a fairness, through an equity lens of, is this even possible? Because if it's not, then you got to scrap it because it's not fair. And it's not going to, and more importantly, if it is a formative piece, if I'm going to use what I get that you produced or you did to guide my instruction for me to understand more accurately where you are on the journey towards getting it, all the stuff we're teaching and learning, if I'm going to use it in that way, and I only get, 70% back, on my return, 30%, it's just not possible for them. Well, that's just unreliable on that point. I remember clearly what's that?
It's not an accurate data point.
No. And I remember clearly starting my teaching career and I, gave homework and did the thing. Class seemed to be going well, and I'd collect homework and grade it and hand it back, and kind of seemed like we were getting it. And I'd get to the summative assessment, I'd get to the end of the unit, only to find out that like 50% of the kids didn't really get it. Well, now you're cooked, right? I mean, the formative, I think we've said this on this podcast, but the formative assessment, the formative feedback is the wellness checkup. I need those as often as I can so I know where I'm at. Well, the summative assessment's the autopsy. It's done. You're dead. It's over. Now I'm figuring out why things went the way they did. And that kept happening to me. I'd be like, what? And I realized, my data points are completely skewed. I'm collecting this homework. I'm grading it, hoping to understand where you were. And with organized minded there, that's where that learning log came in. Because the exit ticket's not sustainable if you're a secondary teacher, because you can't possibly do that every single day. Right. But I could grade them I could read those, grade them at the end of the week, just look at their reflections. And it was like having a pulse, because I wanted them to demonstrate their learning, what might be hanging them up, confusion points within my sphere of influence, which came up on one of the boxers, right? That I don't want you doing this outside of class. I want it to happen here with me collectively together. We would just take 3 or 4 minutes and quietly reflect. And I'm going to collect them at the end of the week. I'm going to read them. I'm going to comment back. And I'd walk in on Monday and it was like having a pulse on every kid in the class that homework never, ever told me, right? Because the only way we know if someone's young or old, really is learning something or where they are with it, is to sit down and have a conversation and have them demonstrate it or articulate it. And you can't do that even in a self-contained first grade class. You don't have time to do that every single day or moment. So, but for me, I could do that in a written way, and it shifted my take on homework. I just started relying less on it. I gave it at times, but there was a very intentional reason for it, and it had very low stakes in case somebody couldn't do it at that time. And you had made a point that I really liked, TJ, a few episodes ago about homework not even necessarily having a due date, that it can be done without penalty, but not just without penalty, but like the whole process of the thing the student is doing it's not time bound, which I think is really interesting.
It's a 4-part test, and there's no penalty if you don't do it. It's not time bound. It's not due on a certain date. They can do it all by themselves on their own without adult intervention. Mm-hmm. And it's connected to something we think they already know. Mm-hmm. Now, even that is access, and it's not agency. So that means that there's kids that will do it and other kids who won't. Now, if you're a compelling teacher, there are assignments that meet that 4-part test that kids can do outside of school. And if you're compelling, most of the kids will do it, or all. Mm-hmm. And that's true of it too. Is like, I used to have teachers when I was a middle school principal, and I could say, what's the percentage of kids who do the homework you ask them to do? And they would say 100%. And I had other teachers who would say like a third. Hmm. And so there are people who can pull it off, but it's still then whether or not it's a true test of what the kid can do or what they looked up. And by the way, now you just stick it in ChatGPT and get the answers to most of these things anyway. We're
going to back to why and what you're assigning, right?
Yeah. Two things. One, I'm nervous. I always get nervous talking about these things because especially the listeners to this podcast, educational leaders, teachers who care, they're doing stuff and they're trying stuff and they're changing stuff. And I don't want them to be offended that I'm calling for a total revolution past where they're at. And I get worried about that because I want people to be included in the conversation. So I'm just throwing that out there. And the second thing is homework's just one structure. Now we're going to talk about homework. Mm-hmm. We're sitting here talking about homework for 15 minutes. And we need to talk about sustaining changes, like real changes, and some strategies for teachers and school leaders. And so it's just so interesting that we can spend this much time on this one little piece, and there's so many other things that need to change for the system to be impacted.
Well, TJ, I don't want to usurp that because I really do want us to talk about the real change and like how it's lasting. But at the same point, I love your analogy of like stripping down the house to its studs. So if that is what we're viewing, then what are the studs that are holding up the house? Like if we're revolutionizing this system and there are some core principles and things that hold the whole thing up like a house, what are those studs, if you will?
One stud for me, and I think this is K-12, is time. This concept that we all learn on the same timetable.
Yeah.
We get put in the system based on our birthday.
Yeah.
The class is 60 minutes. Everybody does the assignment in that period. Like, I think if I was one structure that I would blow up first is time, the element of time. And I actually think there's some tools coming that can help with it, some AI tools that can help with that. But just creating a schedule and following a schedule every day. I've written a ton about the differences between traditional and block and hybrid schedules. But I think that there's a future where time is different for kids than it is right now.
Well, what about like even just a 4-day week versus a 5-day week?
Yeah.
Love that.
Mm-hmm.
Love that.
I know at least states that have implemented that and found great success, but since you brought up time, there's a lot of wasted time in education too.
What's another structure? If you had to pick one of your time, I mean, time is probably my top, and the teacher time too. Like, we need more time in schools where teachers are working without kids. And that's just a fact. Like, they need more planning time. They need more collaboration time. They need more data analysis time. They need more personal time.
Yeah.
Time is a big structural problem. And I think the innovators out there will prove it to us that there's other things that we can do.
I love that. I mean, I keep on thinking, my brain keeps on going to the word support always. But then I think of like, why am I thinking that? Because studs are the support, right? And so I think like, is it all support? Like, is it intertwined? Is that word intertwined? Like, if there were 4 studs to hold this all up, I don't know. I keep on thinking that because I mean, I built businesses on supporting educators and supporting school leaders and administrators, because there's so many people who are trying to support, but not in the right way. And they're not really listening to teachers, and they're not really getting on the ground with them, and they're not giving them their next steps. It's almost like they're see too far ahead. They don't go, it's here where you need to go, right? Like, that's what we do. So I don't know. I love time though. Time is like, that's a really good one. I don't know. Where'd you guys go?
Well, I'm just thinking like the structure of like what we're looking at, right? Like similar to what Mitch was talking about. If I'm giving homework, I got to know the why behind it. Well, as far as the education system goes, like, what is our why? Well, a lot of us will be like, oh, well, obviously, like, mastery learning for students and making sure that they're, being successful and all this. But in the grand scheme of things, that's not true, because we've got high stakes, like standardized testing, and we've got, A through F system grading for districts. And we've got like these higher things that are dictating everything else within the school and the district as far as their decision making, which is also creating more stress. And to TJ's point, time, right? To move on and get them to the next level as quickly as possible. And then you start talking about budgets and all these other things. So like, if those things, and if we're able to move away from, well, one, high stakes standardized testing in general, and like a grading system that really is ineffective if we're really breaking it down, and then giving like teacher autonomy, to your point, Kim, and some of the things that we've already talked about as far as like peer review and teacher evaluations in that system. I think if we were to shift what the true goal is, I think that then dictates a lot of decision making as far as leaders, and then of course trickling down as far as what their true focus should be.
What's the true focus? Because I'm not a fan of high stakes part of the standardized testing movement, but I do believe that we need to hold schools accountable to some level of, English and math proficiency, science, social studies proficiency. But I will also say in that same vein, and I agree with you, Josh, the question about the goal is really, really important. I think it's post-secondary success. And so one of the things I would challenge the system to look at is, I don't think we look at ROI enough, return on our investment. Like, what did kids get from their K-12 experience that lasted a lifetime, that got them into college or got them into a career or got them into the military, and showed them a way with a plan that worked 2, 4, 6 years after they graduated? And switching the question about the goal to, what's the return on the investment that we just put into the education system? We got to know what people are doing when they graduate and that they're successful. That's like a whole passion of mine, the post-secondary success, because we're so focused on this year's test scores, attendance, behavior, and getting the percentage of graduates across the stage. And then after that, we're like, job done. And I don't see it that way at all. And I think that starts in kindergarten.
You know what I loved, Mitch, and maybe this is, I don't know, like, here we go. We're going to start the revolution. Mitch, I love what you were saying about like keeping the pulse on the kids, like what's going on. And then TJ, I was kind of thinking like, you keep that pulse going even after they've graduated, right? Because Mitch, I also love what you said, like the formative assessment, like that's the autopsy, like it's done. And so with those tests and with the scores and everything, like we're going to continue to do the autopsy. Is that what we're doing? It's like the autopsy year after year. Like, isn't there a way to do a pulse that continues? I don't know. That's kind of where my head went, because I love what you're saying. Uh-oh. What's happening? I can't hear you.
His microphone went out.
I love it when stuff like this happens. Right in the middle of the show. You know, I was doing a show one time in a school and a bell rang.
Can't hear you. What?
So since he can't talk, can we just talk about, since we're talking about change, the fact that Mitch's face has changed? Can we talk about that? Because he can't really have a rebuttal at this point.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Shoot, now I gotta stop talking.
Unplug my clean shaven. Yeah, I mean the autopsy is the summative, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the more often you have the formative, which circles back to the whole goal, right? Return on investment. If the goal is post-secondary success in life, like what are the factors that we know that research has shown? And you know where I'm going with this, with executive functioning skills. Like that, I gave a talk earlier this morning and I showed this from a research paper, the aspects of life that are impacted when we support the development of their executive functioning skills. When we talk about return on investment, it's not just content. Some content's important, absolutely important, but there's other factors. So I think we have to rethink the goal, and then that ongoing wellness check is like, how do we know? Because if it is just passing a class or a test, let's just keep it at passing a class. Well, that's predicated on grading. And there's probably no more subjective practice in our industry than grading. I mean, unless you have a really, really tightly built and aligned rubric and you stick to it. I mean, it's very subjective. I'm not even saying that's a bad thing, depending on the goal. So if I can have those touch points as frequently as possible, so I know where you are on the road towards getting it on that journey, I think, one, it's more enjoyable for young people, and young people, when they feel known and where they are, they feel cared for, they're more likely to engage in their learning. And there's a lot that's wrapped up in all of it, but yeah, the ongoing formative, however you design that, to have a pulse, like you know where those kiddos are, makes all the difference, whatever that end goal is.
I was thinking, go ahead.
I was just going to say, because you mentioned it earlier, writing, one of the things I would change structurally is I would say, and I mean this, 3 or 4 times the amount of writing that students do, and at least double the amount that they present, starting in kindergarten. And I always loved the quote, I don't know where it came from, was, I didn't know what I thought until I said it, and I didn't know what I said until I wrote it. It's about clarity of thinking. Mm-hmm. And I would say any teacher listening can do that. 3 times the amount of writing. No unit, no assessment, nothing that doesn't come with some strong writing samples that can be used year over year in front of kids to show them what good writing looks like, and also to have them produce writing all the time. And I'm not talking English teachers here. I'm talking science, social studies, physical education, CTE, math, writing. And that has always bothered me about the system, that we can graduate all these people and they really don't. I mean, if you teach undergraduate and graduate classes, you know, folks struggle to write, and that shouldn't be. I mean, people should be able to clearly identify their thoughts and put them on paper.
Okay, so there's a phrase that I used to use. You guys you're going to love this. It's so sweet. And it's exactly what you said, TJ. Every single time I would send first graders off to write, we would all say together. So I would do my teaching point. We'd do a little practice, interactive, whatever it was. I'd send them off. And before I'd send them off, we would say, if you can think it, you can say it. And if you can say it, you can write it. Then off they went every single time. And it was just like this is a mindset thing. Off we go. And I mean, again, teaching littles, you can draw pictures. Like you said, TJ, your kindergartners, they can draw a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it can be pictures, right? And it can be chicken scratch and labels, but if you can think it, you can say it. If you can say it, you can write it. And I think that goes for all teachers. Get that ingrained in kids' brains, especially when they're little, because I mean, as a mama of a middle schooler, that's something that I have had to retrain and rewire my kid's brain, because there is like one thing that he doesn't want to do. It's going to be writing every single time. And if we can kind of change that, right, in the system, get that going. Yeah, for sure.
It should be joyful. It should be
well, it's low
something
stakes.
that people find pleasure.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and there's no, in terms of formative assessments, that formative feedback, that pulse, what's really interesting because the mistake that I made early on, TJ, you made a point of this, like, I just assumed working with multi-language learners that, well, English language development was happening in which class? English. Right. And then that's not true, which is why I think we should rename at the secondary level. It should be literature class and science class. And right. Because, and that's not just true of students for whom English is not their primary language. I think all kids could benefit from writing and English language development. But in terms of that formative piece, what was interesting for me in my science class, when I kind of had that epiphany, like, oh, I'm not doing anything for these kids if we're not also working and developing our language, right? Written, reading, everything. So having them write to me at the end of every day was one part. Talk to me. I want to know where this landed. I think the lesson went well. How about you? Like, it's that kind of conversation. And then you would, in terms of having a pulse on kids, I think it's easy, and maybe this is just a secondary, middle school, high school thing, to when I'm talking to you, we're having interaction in class, you're doing the work that we're doing, taking the tests we're doing. But when I just ask you to write, just communicate to me. Not texting. This isn't whatever social media, like Snapchatting me or whatever. Like, I want you to write. I want you to practice academic language, right? Because as Doug Lamove says, the complete sentence is the battering ram that knocks down the door to college. I love that line. So if you can't string together some sentences in my 9th grade science class, I'm doing you a disservice. And then I would start reading those, and it was like, oh, you learn so much more about where that student is developmentally with the content that's different than just verbal communication. There's something about writing that down. But I like what you said about joyful, and it's like, we're just writing. This is just what we do. Just talk to me here, right?
Well, wouldn't that also go into like the interdisciplinary design of, so it's not just a course and you only do writing in English, or, I know there's a lot of ways to do that, as far as like, I know a lot of like history and English teachers get together and, they're reading history in English and trying to support that. And there's lots of ways and models and projects that we can connect a lot of different pieces to that. But I would just wish that design was in place more so, because it's so much in a box, and then like, here's your box, unopen it, and this is what you're going to only get in this class, versus in real life, we're pulling from all these different subjects to get to the solution to a problem. And so, actually replicating what they're going to see in the real world versus, again, a system that is disconnected from not only what's professionally happening, but also what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, that is another structure that I would say, if we were talking sustaining change, interdisciplinary approach to things, teachers pushing in and out of classrooms, more collaborative teaching. It reminded me, Josh, of the time when I was a principal, and I forget what grade level it was, but I was literally in a science classroom, and the science teacher was teaching something that had to do with fractions and decimals and some, solving for X and Y. And I asked the science teacher, I'm like, don't they learn this in math class? Like, why are they learning it here? And he goes, that unit doesn't come until later in the year. It's always been a pain point that they don't know that when they need to know it for science early in the year, but they don't learn it in math until later in the year. I said right out loud, that's insane. That's insane that's set up like that. He goes, well, I've been doing this for a decade, and this has been a question mark every single year. I have to teach the math unit to the science kids before the math teacher has to teach the math unit again. I'm like, we're not doing this ever again. Not while I'm here. Not while I'm the principal.
Nope.
No. You know what I was thinking too? There's another thing that I know a lot of elementary teachers do to keep the pulse. And it's what stuck with you today. And usually like it's right on the door and it says what stuck with you today. And usually they put like a post-it or something kind of like all around. If they have like numbers in the classroom, you put the post-it on your number. And I was just talking to a teacher, a one-on-one client of mine. She was like, Kim, I want to do that. I've seen it all over the gram, all over TikTok. She's like, I want to do that. And I was like, okay, well, if you're going to do it, and I know what grade you teach, they're littles. You're not just going to go, what stuck with you today? Like, we're not doing it like that. We're going to be very intentional, right? I love that word. We're going to be very intentional about it. So if you want to just stick with your reading block, it's just with your reading block, right? What stuck with you today in reading, or what stuck with you today just in math, right? What stuck with you today during our morning meeting conversation. So it doesn't have to be just academic stuff. It could also be your social
100%.
emotional learning stuff. It could be like what system, right? Maybe it's an executive functioning system that's supporting them that they're using in their classroom. What system stuck with you today? What really supported you today? And that is keeping your pulse on them as a whole child, not necessarily just like the academic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You like it.
That's also true of big kids too.
Yeah,
right?
everyone.
Interestingly, with the big kids, if you just start it, this formative feedback, this reflection, and you say, hey, tell me what you learned today, they will almost 100% across the board tell you what they did. Mm-hmm. Today, I learned about photosynthesis. And you're going to collect those and read them and expect to like get some formative guidance. Yeah. I know you learned about, I designed the lesson. I know what we did. So this was a giant waste of time. This wasn't a metacognitive activity.
Right.
So again, back being intentional, but being, as you design those reflection experiences, those formative experiences, you have to really guide them intentionally to a place where you are going to get some reliable-ish feedback.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If not, it's a big waste.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, too, I think Kate, a friend of mine says, Peter Hostrauser says K to Gray. I like that strategy for thinking about pedagogy because I really like what works. I don't care how old the kids are. So like segmenting us into like, well, but I'm middle or I'm elementary. Like I know we talk about it on the show too, like the different grade bands, but what works with the research even supports this is that what works for remembering things when you're 7 is almost identical to what works when learning things when you're 17, 27, 47, and 97. So we got to break those structures down. I'd love to invite Josh to say something about the behavioral structures in schools that need to change things, but we are pressing up on time. And I wonder if maybe behavior in schools is another 4-part series, or maybe that's
yes, please.
Thing.
Yeah, I think so. I was looking at the clock. I'm like, there's no way I could do this in like 30 seconds. So I'm glad, TJ, that you pitched that as a 4-point series, because as much as you were banging the table for this series, I would like to do the same for student behavior.
Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Should we wrap things up for this closing episode of our topic?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we were talking about, kind of the structure and the things that are the studs of the house for the educational system if we were to, be a part of that revolution. And I know so many people that are listening, you're listening because you want change. You want to see that revolution occur. So if you are a part of that, and maybe there's a topic that we didn't cover that you feel is part of your stud in your building, your campus, your classroom, definitely hit that up in the comment section. So on YouTube or on Spotify, give us what your stud is. What are your core principles that you feel are needed for students today, for the future, for them to be successful? We would love to hear that feedback. And then, of course, like TJ was saying too, like if there's a topic that you want us to cover in a 4-part series that we haven't done so already, make sure that you're reaching out and let us know. If you're part of Kim's community, obviously that's going to be much easier, as you can jump on Boxer and let her know. But for those outside of that community, feel free to throw it in the comment section in those 2 platforms. We'd love for you to subscribe engage with the show, reach out to us. Our websites are in the show notes for you to make it easy to access us. If there's any resource that you need, if you have a question, if there's any way that we can support you, feel free to do so through our websites. And of course, we will do everything humanly possible to make sure that we get an answer for you or be a part of that solution at your campus or your district. So with that, we're going to close this up. Also in the comment section, I want you to be very honest and reflective about the change of Mitch Weathers' face. So make sure that you do that and let us know how you feel, because I'm having reactions here. I'm not mentally ready for this episode due to this.
Josh is having a hard time.
I'm having a tough time, man. I'm gonna be honest and vulnerable in this space. So, all right, I'm gonna close it down. Hopefully everyone has a great week. Can't wait to see you again, and we'll jump into student discipline for our next series.